The night before, my house shook with laughter that wasn't mine. The sound carried through the glass as though the walls were porous, as though my years of silence had thinned them enough for cruelty to slip inside. Under my windows, the terrace gleamed with garlands strung like cheap jewels, and a speaker spat out music I didn't recognize. I stood in the living room, lights off, a silhouette behind the curtains. From that vantage point, I could see the shadows of bodies moving like waves. Champagne flutes glittered, voices rose and fell, but one cut through them all, sharp and triumphant. "There's no place for someone like you at this party, Martha. You're nothing." They laughed. A crowd of them, their chorus striking the glass like fists. I felt the sound against my skin. Laughter is heavier than any insult when it comes from your own blood. I froze. Not because the words surprised me, no, I had been trained by years of smaller cuts, practiced humiliations hidden under smiles, but because they were shouted openly now, in front of dozens of witnesses. Not whispered at a dinner table, not slipped in a sarcastic joke, but broadcast, amplified, echoed by alcohol and youth and a shameless sense of entitlement. It was my future daughter-in-law Kim's voice I had heard, clear as a bell, as if she had rehearsed it. She was standing on the terrace I had paid to renovate, under lights I had financed, raising a glass bought with my card. She was celebrating my erasure as though it were part of the wedding program. And my son Jake? He didn't defend me. He didn't hush the crowd, didn't demand respect for the woman who had given him everything. No, he laughed too, or at least I imagined it in the indistinct roar, because he had learned long ago that silence can be as sharp as a knife. I didn't open the door. I didn't step outside into that hostile brightness to demand acknowledgement. I stayed in the dark. My palms pressed against the windowsill, cold with sweat. My heart beat in a slow, deliberate rhythm, not of pain but of awakening. Something inside me, a rope I had been clutching for years, began to fray. At some point the music swelled louder, drowning out my name, drowning out the insult, but it didn't matter. The words had already etched themselves inside me. "You're nothing." When dawn came, the terrace was silent. Cups tipped over, confetti stuck to the grass. From my kitchen table, I watched the aftermath like someone examining the battlefield of a war they hadn't chosen. Then my phone buzzed. The family group chat lit up. The message was short, shameless, almost casual. "Mom, can you cover our credit card bill this month? We're broke." Not even a hello. Not even a thank you for the countless other bills I had quietly absorbed. Just a demand, typed with the same fingers that had held glasses raised in my ridicule hours earlier. I smirked, though my chest felt heavy with something colder than anger. I typed, slow and deliberate. "For you, the bank is closed. Forever." I pressed send and set the phone down on the table. For a moment I simply stared at it, as though expecting it to ring with an apology, an explanation, some flicker of recognition. Nothing came. "My name is Ella Carter, 58 years old, owner of a chain of co-working spaces scattered across Seattle, built floor by floor with money I didn't have in time I could barely afford. I buried my husband when I was 36, still young enough to be desirable, but already old enough to understand that widowhood turns you into stone. People expect you to endure without complaint. I had endured. Nights without sleep. Holidays without rest. Debt that wrapped itself around my throat like a rope, each bank meeting another tightening of the noose. I ate canned soup so Jake could have fresh fruit. I sold my wedding jewelry so he could go on school trips without shame. I built a business, then another, turning sweat into revenue until I could finally breathe again. I told myself I was doing it for him. My only son. My legacy, my blood, my reason. And last week, in an act of loyalty that bordered on desperation, I had prepared a wedding gift, $7. $5 million. A transfer waiting in my safe, signed and ready. It wasn't just money. It was my last attempt at peace, at recognition, at weaving myself back into his life in a way that couldn't be mocked. I thought of it as a bridge. Perhaps naively, perhaps pathetically, but still, a bridge. But words shouted from a terrace can burn bridges faster than fire. That morning I walked to the safe in the study. I punched the code with hands that didn't tremble. Inside lay the folder with the transfer documents, the carefully prepared account details, the proof of my generosity. I flipped through the papers, page after page of numbers, decimals, signatures. Then I closed the folder, returned it to the safe and spun the dial shut. Click. Final. The money would stay with me. Not because I wanted it, not because I loved it, but because I finally understood what it had become. A leash around my own neck. Ahead lay Jake and Kim's wedding. A celebration where they expected me to arrive like a wallet disguised as a mother. To hand over my millions with a smile. To accept my seat by the column. My name misspelled on a card. My silence treated as complicity. I would attend, but not to congratulate. I would go to close an account not of dollars but of decades of use and abuse. The night before had been their laughter. The morning after was my verdict. The bank was closed. And this time forever meant forever. Insults don't arrive like bombs. They creep in like dampness, invisible at first, spreading through the walls until everything is stained. By the time you notice it's too late, the house is already rotting. That's how it was with Jake and Kim. The night of the mockery had been the loudest, the most public. But it wasn't the beginning. No, beginnings are quieter, disguised as jokes, accidents, misunderstandings. They start with a misseated chair, a forgotten name card, a laugh too sharp to be innocent. At the rehearsal dinner, they placed me at the far end of the table, behind a column. I had to lean forward to see the bride and groom, had to strain my neck to catch the toasts. When I asked discreetly about my seat, Jake chuckled. Don't take it personally, Mom. It's just logistics. Logistics. I built a business from nothing. I carried balance sheets heavier than his childhood body, yet I was reduced to a seating error. Later that night, when the glasses were being handed out, mine arrived with a sticker pasted clumsily on the side. It read, in bold letters, "Sponsor." Everyone laughed. It's just a joke, Kim's bridesmaid said. A joke. My identity compressed into a financial role and served with a smile. Then came the digital barbs. On Kim's social media stories a filter appeared. A glittering crown with the caption "Old money without love." The comments filled with emojis and laughter. I saw it though they assumed I wouldn't. They forgot that even mothers can learn to navigate the world they inhabit. And Jake, my son, my only blood, added his own little dagger. Mom's generosity is a family tradition. Can't stop her. Said with a laugh, casual, as if I were a quirk of genetics. Not sacrifice. Not devotion. A tradition. A habit like biting one's nails. I said nothing. I swallowed it all like I had swallowed everything for decades. Because silence was what I had been trained into since widowhood forced me into a role I hadn't chosen. I became a widow at 36. My husband, Michael, died in a car accident on a gray February afternoon, leaving me with a 12-year-old boy and a mortgage larger than my courage. Grief could have drowned me, but necessity doesn't let you die. I rolled up my sleeves and started again. I turned a rented office into a small co-working hub, then another, then a chain. I ate at my desk, worked through Christmas, skipped vacations. Not because I loved the grind, but because I wanted my son to live without fear. I wanted him to feel that though his father was gone, his future was intact. For years I wrote checks in silence. For his tuition. For his first car. For rent when he claimed his paycheck hadn't arrived. For emergencies that repeated with suspicious regularity. Each time I told myself, this is love. This is motherhood. This is what it means to give. But love without boundaries becomes slavery. And I had built my own chains. The rehearsal dinner was the final straw, though I didn't show it then. I smiled politely, folded the napkin neatly on my lap, and excused myself early. At home in the quiet, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Tom Reeves, came the steady voice of my attorney. It's Ella, I said, and my voice surprised me with its calmness. Don't make the transfer. The $7. $5 million, cancel it. He was silent for a moment. Then carefully. Are you certain? More than certain. And Tom, come by tonight. We're rewriting the will. I hung up before doubt could creep in. Afterward, I went to the shelf where I kept small hidden tools of survival. There, under old photo albums, lay a digital recorder. I held it in my hands for a long moment. Words argue. People twist them. They say you misunderstood, you exaggerated, you imagined. But recordings? They are pure steel. They don't bend. I slipped the recorder into my clutch. It felt heavy like a wee *P***N, though it weighed almost nothing. Then I went to my closet. Rows of dresses stared back at me, silk, sequins, lace. Clothes meant for someone who still wanted to be admired. But admiration was no longer the goal. I reached for a simple navy dress, plain as a uniform, and smoothed the fabric between my palms. I was not going as a mother. I was not going as a sponsor. I was going as an auditor. The wedding would not be a celebration. It would be an examination. I stood before the mirror, fastening the clasp of a modest necklace. My reflection looked back at me, lined but firm, a face hardened by years of swallowing pain. I whispered aloud, testing the sound of my own conviction. This ends now. And for the first time in years I believed myself. When I arrived at the pre-wedding party, the first thing I noticed was the order of entrance. Guests were ushered in with smiles, greeted by the photographer, offered glasses of champagne. When my turn came, the door attendant hesitated, checked the list twice, and then finally waved me through as if allowing a stranger into a club. By then, the laughter from inside had already announced that I was late, not by my clock, but by theirs. I stepped into a room blazing with chandeliers. The scent of lilies and expensive perfume hung thick in the air. Music pulsed softly, the kind chosen to make people feel elegant. Yet when I crossed the threshold, conversation seemed to dip for a second. Faces turned, eyes flicked over me, and then turned away again with the practiced ease of people pretending not to notice. The host, one of Jake's friends, a man I'd once paid through college with scholarships I helped arrange, clinked a glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "time for a little fun. A raffle of gifts from our generous Ella." The crowd roared. My name was spoken like a punchline. On the massive screen above the bar a slide appeared. A fake bank card with Ella card printed in golden letters. Then came the memes. Animated images of ATMs spitting money, each captioned "Insert mother here." Applause, whistles, stomping feet. I stood there still as marble. My son Jake was in the middle of the crowd, arms slung around Kim's waist, his laughter caught in a spotlight. He didn't stop it. He didn't even glance my way to gauge if I was hurt. To him, this performance was natural, a family tradition, perhaps, like he liked to say. Behind me, close enough that the words brushed my skin, I heard Kim hiss to her bridesmaid, "The old generation won't quit until they buy us the honeymoon." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was gleeful. A private cruelty meant for one ear but gifted to mine. I felt a chill slide over me, not from the air, but from the clarity of recognition. My body wanted to tremble, to shiver in humiliation, but I refused it. Instead, I shifted the clutch in my hands, adjusting it so the recorder inside sat steady. The red eye blinked, silent witness to their contempt. I didn't react. To do so would have been to play my part in their theater. Instead, I let their performance continue, every line caught, every laugh documented. When I finally stepped outside for air, the night felt colder than it should. In the parking lot, I approached my car, but the guard stopped me. He handed me a slip of paper. A parking ticket without a validation stamp. "This isn't right," I said calmly. He shrugged, eyes avoiding mine. "Must have been a mistake. You'll need to pay the fine." Before I would have sighed, taken out my card, and absorbed the inconvenience. But something inside me had shifted. I lifted my phone, photographed the ticket, zoomed in on his badge number, noted the time. Small humiliations are never isolated. They are logistics. They have organizers, participants, witnesses. Respect and disrespect both have supply chains. Tonight I was no longer blind to them. As I slid into my car, I replayed the images in my mind. The screen mocking me, the crowd howling, Kim's whisper, Jake's laughter. For years I had excused these things as accidents, as the thoughtless exuberance of youth. But youth had long since passed. Jake was not a child. Kim was not inexperienced. These were choices, calculations. The engine hummed, and I let it drown the noise of memory. But inside me, a new kind of silence grew. Not the silence of endurance, but the silence of record-keeping. The silence of a woman preparing evidence, not excuses. By the time I reached home, my resolve had hardened. I took off the navy dress and hung it carefully in the closet, as though preserving a uniform for another battle. Then I placed the recorder on my desk, watching its small light blink out as I powered it down. I transferred the files to a secure drive, labeling them with precision: pre-wedding party, public mockery, private insult, parking lot incident. I made tea though I barely tasted it. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory of 1,000 lonely evenings. But my mind was awake, sharper than it had been in years. I had once believed motherhood required forgiveness, that a mother must absorb, must bend, must never confront. That belief had shaped me into something malleable, something they could mold. But tonight showed me the cost. They had crowned me with ridicule in front of strangers. They had placed a label on me, ATM, and believed I would carry it willingly. I thought of Michael, my late husband. He had died too young, leaving me with Jake and a mountain of fear. If he had lived, would Jake have turned out differently? Or was this cruelty already in him, nurtured not by absence but by indulgence? The tea cooled untouched. My eyes rested on the recorder. For the first time I felt gratitude toward an object, toward its neutrality. Machines do not doubt. They do not reinterpret. They capture. They preserve. That night as I lay in bed I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because tears felt too soft, too light for the weight pressing down on me. What I felt was not sadness. It was inventory. Every humiliation, every word, every gesture. Logged. Stored. Waiting. The crown they had tried to place on my head, a crown of mockery, of idiom jokes and old money filters, had slipped. In its place grew something harder, sharper. Not a crown but armor. Tomorrow I told myself they will keep performing. They will keep mocking. And I will keep recording. And one day soon I will press play. St. Gabriel's stood solemn against the morning sky. Its stone walls weathered by decades of baptisms, weddings, and funerals. The air smelled of wax and lilies, the perfume of ritual, the kind that cloaks deceit in sanctity. Guests filed into the nave, laughter echoing off high arches, while the choir rehearsed gentle hymns. I had dressed deliberately simple. The navy dress, modest heels, no diamonds, no silk. A mother is expected to glitter at her son's wedding, but I was not there to play the expected role. My purpose was different, colder. I moved quietly along the side corridor, the one that led toward the sacristy. The walls were cool stone, the kind that remembers centuries. I intended only to pause, to collect myself before facing another staged humiliation. But then voices drifted from the partially open side door. Familiar voices. Jake's. "Lil, just hold on a bit," he whispered. His tone was coaxing, impatient. "As soon as Mom signs, we'll rent the loft, fly away without prying eyes." The name caught me first. Lil. Not Kim. Not the bride. Lil, his assistant from the office. I knew her. Young, efficient, always smiling too brightly when I visited. My blood slowed. Jake's voice continued, confident in secrecy. "Mom always smooths things over. Always. She'll sign like she always does." That word, always, struck deeper than the mention of Lil. Always. A verdict, a prophecy, an inheritance of habit. It was the confirmation that in his eyes I was not a person. I was a machine, predictable, compliant, programmed to rescue. The recorder in my clutch blinked red. Every syllable etched in digital permanence. I leaned against the stone wall, its chill seeping into my back, anchoring me as my insides twisted. Once years ago I would have cried. I would have covered my mouth, staggered away, hidden in a bathroom until I could plaster on a smile. But not now. Tears belonged to the old Ella, the Ella who still believed sacrifices bought loyalty. Now I formed a plan. Silence is a liar's sanctuary. Money is the leash that lets betrayal thrive. If I confronted him here, if I demanded answers, he would deflect, dismiss, twist. "Mom, you misunderstood. Mom, it was a joke. Mom, you're imagining things." He had done it before countless times. But a recorder does not imagine. A recording does not cry. It simply plays. So I stayed hidden. I let him finish his rehearsal of betrayal, let him plant words in the soil of the sacristy, where vows would soon be exchanged. Words about lofts, about escapes, about my signature being the final green light for his double life. I breathed deeply, slow and steady. The church smelled of incense, of sanctity, but beneath it I smelled rot. The rot of plans spun behind the back of the one who built his very life. When Jake finally walked away, his footsteps fading, I didn't follow. I pressed my palm against the stone, grounding myself in the ancient solidity of the wall. Let it witness, I thought. Let these stones add their silence to mine. I slipped back into the nave and took my seat. Around me, guests murmured, adjusted programs, whispered compliments about Kim's dress, Jake's suit, the flowers. No one saw me differently. To them, I was just the mother of the groom, perhaps nervous, perhaps proud. They couldn't see that I carried in my clutch the first knife plunged into my back, a knife I had chosen not to remove, but to display when the time was right. The organ swelled, the first notes of the procession trembling through the air. Guests stood, necks craning. I remained seated a moment longer, watching the doors swing open, the pageantry unfold. My son at the altar, his lips pressed into a smile that now looked to me like a mask stretched too tightly. I thought of the words I had heard minutes before. As soon as Mom signs. They reverberated inside me louder than the organ. The ceremony hadn't yet begun n, but for me, the marriage was already stained. Behind vows of loyalty lay whispers of escape. Behind promises of forever lay the calculation of inheritance. I didn't rise to stop it. I didn't storm the aisle, clutching evidence like a prophet with tablets. That would have given them the gift of chaos, of drama they could later dismiss. No. I would let the ceremony proceed. I would let the photos be taken, the applause rise, the illusion built higher. Because the higher the illusion, the more devastating its collapse. When the organ paused and the priest began to speak, my hands rested calmly in my lap. No one saw the red light still glowing in my clutch. No one knew that truth, sharp as glass, lay hidden among my lipstick and keys. Great battles are not won by noise. They are won by timing. And I, a woman who had once been mocked as nothing, had discovered the power of waiting. The sacristy corridor had given me one wound, and I carried it silently, like a shard embedded beneath the skin. But betrayal, I was learning, never arrives alone. It travels in pairs, in echoes, in layers of cruelty so calculated that each new revelation dulls the shock of the last. It was near the bride's chamber that the second knife slid between my ribs. The dressing room door stood ajar, light spilling out in golden strips across the church's old wooden floor. I hadn't intended to linger. I was simply moving down the corridor, seeking air, seeking distance from the suffocating chatter of the guests. But voices rose, sharp with confidence, and I stopped. Kim's voice. "By law, my half is mine," she declared, the words carrying the cadence of someone who had rehearsed them. And then divorce quietly. And Jake's mom? A luxury nursing home. Let her live fancy but far away. Laughter followed. A chorus of bridesmaids, the sound brittle as broken glass. The words sliced deeper than Jake's whispers with Lil. Affairs are predictable, banal, the common currency of weak men. But this was strategy. This was dispossession mapped out in the bride's own chamber. Between the final touches of powder and lipstick. They were not simply marrying. They were already dissolving, already dividing. Already burying me alive in a home bought with my own sacrifices. My hand trembled against the clutch. Inside, the recorder blinked. Word for word, place and date. No one could deny it. Their laughter was preserved. Their contempt catalogued. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not from sadness. Sadness was a luxury I could no longer afford. But from the cold realization of how efficiently they had erased me. I was not even an obstacle to be fought. I was an asset to be relocated, stored, silenced. A mother turned into paperwork. One of the bridesmaids giggled, her voice syrupy. "You'll get everything, Kim. You always do." Kim replied, casual, like discussing flowers or cake flavors. "Of course. Jake's soft. He'll follow my lead. He always does." They laughed again and the sound swelled, echoing into the corridor. I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall. My fingers clutched the recorder so tightly the edges cut into my skin. I could almost feel the bruise forming, a physical reminder of the moment. There was a time when such words would have shattered me, when I would have burst into the room screaming, demanding explanations, demanding to be seen. But I had learned. Shouting is a gift to betrayers. It lets them paint you as hysterical, unstable, emotional. They would turn it into proof of my unworthiness. No, silence is sharper. Evidence speaks louder than rage. I retreated, each step measured, until the door and its poisoned laughter faded into the background noise of organ music and shuffling guests. I found an empty pew in the shadows and sat down, my pulse a steady drum in my ears. They had already signed me away in their minds, already deposited me into a home, tidy and distant, where I could live fancy but never interfere. The insult wasn't just in the plan, it was in the certainty with which they spoke it. The certainty that I would comply, that I would hand over my fortune, that I would vanish on schedule. I stared at the stained glass window above the altar. Colors bled into each other. Blues into reds, saints into shadows. Once, as a child, I had believed stained glass was alive, that the figures looked back at you. Now all I saw was glass, beautiful, fragile, and indifferent. My son's fiancée, the woman he chose, had laughed at the prospect of exiling me. And my son, if he did not yet know of this plan, it was only because he didn't need to. He had already written his part in the play. Mom always signs. That was his line. Between the sacristy and the bride's room, I had been stripped to nothing. Wife to widow. Mother to sponsor. Sponsor to burden. Burden to exile. I closed my eyes and breathed in. The air smelled of lilies and dust. For the first time I felt the cold relief of clarity. Knowing you've been written off hurts, yes. But realizing you haven't yet signed their contract of erasure? That brings power. They could plan, they could laugh, they could already draft their divorce papers in whispers. But I still held the pen. And I had not yet moved it across the page. I tightened my grip on the clutch, steadying myself. Great battles are not won by outrage. They are won by patience, by timing, by revealing the truth when the stage is most brightly lit. So I said nothing. I sat in the pew, spine straight, hands folded, the recorder safe. Let them prepare their performance. Let them lace their vows with poison. Because when the curtain fell, I would not scream. I would not beg. I would press play. The church bells rang, summoning silence. Guests rustled into their seats, fabric brushing wood, throats clearing, programs snapping open and closed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, heavy with the perfume of lilies. I sat halfway down the aisle, my navy dress blending with the shadows. From where I was, I could see Jake's profile at the altar. My son, hair combed with precision, jaw tight with the seriousness of a groom. He looked noble, almost saintly in the filtered light of stained glass. A stranger. The organ swelled and the doors opened. Kim appeared on her father's arm, radiant in white lace. Cameras clicked. Phones lifted discreetly. Gasps fluttered from the pews. Admiration, envy, awe. Every face turned toward her, as if she were a queen stepping into her kingdom. But I heard none of it as they did. I heard only the soundtrack of the corridors. As soon as Mom signs. By law my half is mine. Nursing home far away. The vows began. Jake's voice solemn and deep. I promise to be faithful, to support you, to cherish you in joy and in sorrow, in wealth and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live. The guests sighed. Someone dabbed a tear. My throat burned, not with emotion but with the acid of irony. Support? Cherish. I remembered his whisper to Lil. We'll rent the loft, fly away. His vows were not promises, they were camouflage. Then Kim, her veil trembling slightly as she spoke. I give myself to you completely, in loyalty, in trust, in forever. Her voice rang like a hymn, but in my ears I heard the counterpoint. Divorce quietly. Half is mine. Nursing home. Her lips mouthed forever, while her laughter still echoed in my memory from the dressing room. Forever lasted only as long as my signature held value. The priest raised his hand, blessing their union, his voice smooth with ritual. What God has joined together, let no one put asunder. But I knew better. What joined them was not God. It was calculation. It was greed. It was the expectation that my millions would lubricate their short-lived fairy tale. When the priest asked, if anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace, the hall froze. All eyes flicked nervously, half in anticipation, half in dread of some drama. I sat motionless. My objection lay not in words but in the weight of my clutch, in the silent blinking of a recorder. I would not rise. Not yet. I let them kiss to applause. Let the guests erupt, clapping, cheering, crying. I let the photos be taken, the videos recorded. Every illusion needs its perfect frame, and the cleaner the frame, the sharper the dirt appears when the truth is revealed. The choir launched into a hymn. People rose to their feet. My son and his bride walked down the aisle triumphant, showered in petals and light. They waved, they smiled, they basked in the warmth of approval. And I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face composed. Inside me, silence stretched wide. Not the silence of defeat but of calculation. Every vow, every holy word, every smile was a mask. And I had already gathered the evidence of what lay beneath. I studied Jake's face as he passed me, his eyes scanning the crowd, never meeting mine. Kim glanced in my direction but looked away quickly, as though she had already erased me from the scene. Let them. Because when the music faded, when the champagne flowed, when the toasts were called for, that was when the curtain would drop. That was when holy words would collide with recorded truth, and the applause that had carried them would turn to gasps. The reception was held beneath chandeliers that dripped with light, every crystal trembling as if eager to magnify the spectacle. Tables gleamed with silver cutlery and folded napkins shaped into roses. Waiters in black vests moved like shadows, carrying trays of champagne. I entered quietly. No one rushed to greet me. No one saved me a seat near the bride and groom. I was guided instead to a table near the exit, as though I might need to slip away unnoticed, as though my role had already been reduced to presence without participation. But I had not come to vanish. The band struck up a soft jazz number. Guests raised glasses, laughter floated across the hall, and the scent of overripe roses mingled with perfume and sweat. Jake and Kim glowed at the center, the golden couple, their smiles sharp enough to blind. When the master of ceremonies announced, "And now, a word from the groom's mother," a polite murmur rippled through the room. Some clapped out of obligation. Others smirked, expecting another round of ATM jokes. I rose slowly, adjusting the clutch in my hand. I stood beneath the chandeliers, their light catching the navy of my dress. My gaze swept the crowd, my son's friends, Kim's parents, colleagues, relatives. Dozens of witnesses, their phones ready, their eyes alert for entertainment. I began with courtesy. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this union. It is a day of joy. My voice carried, calm, almost formal. I let the pause linger. Then I added, as some of you know, I had prepared a wedding gift for Jake and Kim. A hush fell. The word gift glimmered like bait. Heads turned. Forks stilled midair. A gift of $7.5 million. Gasps. A collective intake of breath, like a wave ** king back before it crashes. Some faces lit with admiration, others with envy. Kim's bridesmaids widened their eyes. Jake's friends whistled softly. Even Kim's parents stiffened, their pride flickering into calculation. I reached into my clutch and set the small recorder on the table before me. The red light blinked once like a signal flare. I pressed play. Jake's voice filled the hall, tinny but clear. As soon as Mom signs, we'll rent the loft, fly away without prying eyes. The words dropped like stones into water. The room rippled with shock. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered against porcelain. I let the silence stretch a beat before pressing again. Kim's voice, confident, amused. By law my half is mine. And then divorce quietly. And Jake's mom, a luxury nursing home. Let her live fancy but far away. Laughter followed, the bridesmaids sharp and unmistakable. On the screen behind me, where moments earlier a slideshow of romantic photos had played, the caption still lingered. Family is everything. The contradiction was cinematic. The timing perfect. The hall froze. Guests looked at one another, mouths open, hands hovering above glasses. Kim's face drained of color. Jake shifted, stammering something inaudible. I straightened my shoulders. My voice cut clean through the silence. The gift is cancelled. My attorney has already been informed. The ATM is closed. No raised tone. No tremor. Just finality. I left the microphone on the stand and stepped down. Behind me, the music had died mid-bar, the band frozen, instruments slack in their hands. The chandeliers glittered as if mocking the stillness below. I walked across the hall, each step echoing louder than applause. Eyes followed me, whispers beginning to rise like smoke. But I didn't look back. I had given them their show. Not the one they expected, but the one they deserved. The silence after my words was the kind that hums in the bones. For a moment the hall seemed to hang suspended, like glass about to shatter. Then it began. Whispers spreading in waves, the sound of chairs scraping, the first tentative laughter of disbelief. Jake's *T up from his chair, face red, voice cracking. It was a joke, he shouted. His words collided with the heavy air. Desperate, flimsy. Mom, you know me. I was just joking with Lil. But the recording still echoed in everyone's ears. As soon as Mom signed, there was no laughter in that voice, no playfulness. Only calculation. Kim, pale as her dress, pressed a hand to her chest. Doctored, she hissed, eyes darting from guest to guest. That recording's been manipulated. It's not real. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They needed only 2 words. Time and place. The recording matched the day's program. Jake was in the sacristy minutes before the ceremony. Kim had been in her dressing room. Every guest knew it. The evidence fit like puzzle pieces. Phones lit up. Fingers typed rapidly. Did you hear that? Unbelievable. She caught them. Videos uploaded before my heels even touched the carpet. Kim's parents stood frozen at their table, hands clasped tightly, their faces carved from stone. They did not rush to defend her. They did not rise. They sat as though they too had been recorded, and the whole world had just pressed play. Someone near the bar whispered too loudly. 7.5 million gone. Just like that. Another voice chimed in. She caught them red-handed. At their own wedding. The atmosphere boiled. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering, recording, snapping photos of Jake and Kim's crumbling composure. A bridesmaid tried to laugh, to dismiss it all, but her giggle rang false, brittle. Jake staggered down the steps toward me, his tie loosened, his composure bleeding away. He grabbed my arm, gripped tight, eyes wild. Mom, wait. Please, just, you misunderstood. Boundaries, Mom, boundaries, you're overreacting. I looked at his hand on my sleeve. Calmly, I said one word. Boundaries. The word hit him harder than a slap. His grip loosened, then fell away. For the first time, he seemed to realize that I was no longer the mother who rescued, who paid, who excused. I walked past him, through the crowd parting like water. Faces blurred, some pitying, some admiring, some gloating at the scandal. I heard fragments of conversation. She played it in front of everyone. Kim's finished. No coming back from this. Jake, what an idiot. The chandelier still glittered, but the glow had turned harsh, unforgiving, as if the light itself mocked their performance. I reached the staircase. The heavy doors loomed ahead, leading out into the night. I descended slowly, deliberately. Behind me the noise swelled. Accusations, denials, explanations shouted into a storm of disbelief. Outside the air was cool, sharp against my skin, washing away the sticky warmth of the hall. The city lights shimmered in the distance, indifferent. I stood for a moment on the steps, breathing in the silence that existed only beyond their laughter, their gasps, their excuses. I felt no triumph. No sweet taste of victory. Only quiet, like the stillness after a long storm, when the air is heavy with rain, and you can finally hear your own heartbeat. Inside, their masks were gone. In front of witnesses, in front of family, in front of strangers who would carry the story into the city by morning, Jake and Kim had been revealed for what they were. And me? For the first time, I was not their sponsor, not their fool, not their invisible servant. I was simply myself. The morning after the wedding felt like waking from a fever. The city outside my window hummed with its usual rhythm. Buses hissing, rain tapping softly on the glass. But inside, everything had shifted. I was no longer tethered. The rope I had clung to for decades had snapped, and though the fall was dizzying, the air tasted cleaner. Tom Reeves arrived just after 9. He carried his leather briefcase, worn smooth from years of battles, and a thermos of black coffee. He had been my attorney once, back when I was clawing my way from widowhood into solvency. Now, decades later, he returned not as a hired service but as an ally. We sat at the oak table in my kitchen, the same table where I had once written checks for Jake's tuition, for his first apartment's rent, for his countless rescues from temporary setbacks. That table had witnessed my quiet sacrifices. Now it would witness my severance. Ella, Tom said gently, opening his case. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I know last night must have been. He hesitated, searching for a word softer than betrayal. I spared him the effort. Necessary, I said. Last night was necessary. And so is this. He nodded, understanding. He laid out the documents, each one precise, clinical lines of text that would reshape the map of my life. First, the will. The $7. $5 million I had once earmarked for Jake and Kim was redirected. Instead, it would fund a foundation, the Step Forward Fund, dedicated to supporting single parents trying to build businesses the way I once had. Mothers with nothing but a rented desk and a will to survive. Fathers who worked night shifts and dreamed of more. My legacy would no longer be a chain around my neck. It would be a key for someone else's lock. Second, Jake's trust. Closed. Access revoked. The account that had once dripped into his life like a steady flow of indulgence was cut off. No more silent subsidies. No more quiet transfers disguised as gifts. Third, account access. Tom's PIN moved with precision. Passwords were changed. Secondary authorizations revoked. My fortune, once porous and exposed, tightened into something sealed, deliberate. Fourth, powers of attorney. Revised. The old documents, drafted when I was still clinging to hope, had left loopholes, spaces where a son could one day wedge his ambition. Those spaces closed now, replaced by ironclad protections. I signed each paper with steady hands. With every signature, I felt something loosen inside me. A weight, a burden, a debt I had never owed. When the last document lay complete, Tom looked at me over his glasses. "Ella," he said, "what you've done here, it isn't just financial. It's an act of survival. And maybe an act of justice." I didn't answer. Justice was too noble a word. What I felt was colder, simpler control. At the office that afternoon, I opened a new account with my team. We labeled it plainly, Step Forward Fund. No glamour, no secrecy. Just a vessel for transformation. As I handed over the first deposit slip, I realized something. For years, my money had been a chain. Now it became a tool. When I stepped outside, Seattle's rain fell lightly, misting the air. Once I would have hurried, umbrella raised, worried about appearances. Now I let the drops cling to my hair, streak my cheeks. The city didn't notice me, and that anonymity was freedom. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message lit the screen. "Call me, it's not what it seems. Jake." The same boy who once pressed his small hand into mine on the first day of school. The same young man I watched walk across a graduation stage, my throat raw with pride. The same man who, only hours ago, had plotted my removal. I pressed my thumb to the side of the phone. The screen went dark. The message disappeared into silence. Things stay as recorded. That night I sat in my studio, surrounded by unfinished clay vessels. I had taken up pottery years ago. A quiet rebellion against spreadsheets and contracts. The wheel spun beneath my hands, steady and rhythmic. Clay bent to pressure, not unlike people. Too much force and it collapsed. Too little, and it hardened uselessly. I pressed my palms firmly, shaping the form. A vessel born not of indulgence but of purpose. For decades, I had poured myself out until I was empty. Now I was learning the other half of the craft, to hold, to contain, to keep. The bank was closed. The papers were signed. The vector of my life had shifted. And for the first time in years, I slept without waking at 3 a.m. to check my balance, to calculate what more I could sacrifice. The storm was still outside, yes, but inside the air was finally still. I began with the house. For years, every corner of it had been curated not for me but for them. For visits that never came. For holidays where I was left waiting by the phone. For the fantasy of a family I thought I still possessed. Now, each photograph on the wall stared like an accusation. Smiling faces in graduation gowns, vacations I had funded, birthdays where the cake was bought with my savings. None of them smiled for me. I took the frames down one by one. The sound of nails slipping from plaster echoed like tiny liberations. I placed the photos in cardboard boxes, not to destroy but to contain, to quarantine. They belonged to a past that had expired. In their place I hung ceramics from my studio, bowls, plates, abstract tiles, imperfect but mine. Clay I had pressed with my own hands, clay that remembered only me. The walls no longer told the story of sacrifice. They began to whisper something else, survival. The kitchen, once my silent bank branch, underwent the same cleansing. The drawer where I kept envelopes of emergency cash for Jake, emptied. The file where I stored receipts from years of quiet rescues, shredded. Even the chipped mug he favored when he occasionally visited, gone. Every removal was a declaration. I was no longer a wallet disguised as a woman. I filled the emptiness with something I had denied myself for decades. Creation. The studio became my second home. Mornings that once began with account checks and anxious texts now began with clay spinning beneath my fingers. The wheel hummed steadily, a heartbeat louder than memory. The first time I sat at the circle of women in the pottery workshop, I felt almost out of place. They laughed easily, their aprons stained with earth, their chatter filled with stories of failed marriages, children who had grown distant, rediscoveries of self. I listened more than I spoke, my silence heavy with years of unvoiced grievances. But silence didn't frighten them. They welcomed it. One woman, a nurse named Clara, leaned over and pressed a lump of clay into my palm. "Don't overthink," she said, grinning. "Clay likes truth. If you're angry, let it show. If you're tired, let it sag. That's where the beauty comes from." So I pressed, I shaped, I let my hands tremble without shame. A misshapen vase emerged, lopsided, cracked at the rim. I would once have discarded it. Instead, I fired it. The crack became its line of strength, a place where light could escape. It was there I met Sam. He wasn't loud or intrusive. A former engineer, his hands bore the memory of building bridges, though now they coaxed bowls into being. He taught me about kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with seams of gold, turning fractures into beauty. "One day," he said, holding a bowl he had mended, "someone will see only the golden veins, but will know the cracks came first." His words lingered. My life, I realized, was a vessel cracked by betrayal. But perhaps with time I too could choose what to fill the seams with. Not gold maybe, but something more enduring, truth. We began walking along the waterfront after workshops. Sometimes we spoke of art, sometimes of silence. He never asked about Jake or Kim. He didn't need to. The absence around me spoke loudly enough. At home, the transformation continued. Evenings no longer belonged to phone calls begging for rent money or transfers marked urgent. I muted numbers. I poured wine into one of my own cups, the glaze uneven, the surface imperfect. Imperfection became its charm. I discovered music again. Not the background noise of dinner parties, but songs I hadn't played since my 20s, vinyl records dusted off, spinning with nostalgia and defiance. The house, once filled with the weight of obligation, began to echo with my own rhythm. And slowly the fear, that corrosive fear of being unloved if I did not pay, dissolved. For the first time in years, I lived without waiting for gratitude, without waiting for demands, without waiting for Jake's familiar, perfunctory, "Mom, can you?" I realized something shocking. Solitude is lighter than servitude. One evening after a workshop, I sat on the balcony with Sam. We shared silence, the city glowing below, the sea air carrying salt. He handed me a small bowl he had made, its rim imperfect but traced with gold lines. "Cracks don't weaken," he said. "They reveal." I turned it in my hands, the golden veins gleaming under the streetlight. I thought of the years I had spent patching other people's holes with my money, with my labor, with my silence. Now finally I was repairing my own. Life without the role of wallet was not empty. It was terrifying, yes, but also vast. A field I had never walked stretching out before me. And though my steps were unsteady, they were mine. The knock came on a Sunday afternoon, hesitant but insistent, echoing through the quiet house I had remade for myself. I had been shaping clay at the wheel, my hands damp, the rhythm soothing. The sound cut through like an old memory intruding into new life. When I opened the door, Jake stood there. Alone. No Kim clinging to his arm, no friends buzzing behind him, no cameras. Just my son, pale, unshaven, a suit jacket wrinkled as though he had slept in it. His eyes, once full of unearned confidence, were downcast. "Mom," he said, voice breaking. I stepped aside without a word. He entered like a man approaching judgment. He sat at the edge of a chair in the living room, the same chair where he had once sprawled as a teenager asking for gas money. Now he perched, as if afraid to break the air between us. "I don't need money," he blurted too quickly. His hands twisted together. I need you to forgive me." The words hung there. Once they would have cracked me open. Once I would have rushed to embrace him, to reassure him, to drown him in absolution. But I had learned. Forgiveness is not a key. Forgiveness is not access. I folded my hands in my lap, clay still under my fingernails grounding me. "Forgiveness," I said evenly, "is for me to sleep at night. Not for you to walk back into my wallet. He flinched as if struck. His eyes searched mine, desperate for softness, for the mother he remembered, or rather, the mother he depended on. Mom, I was wrong. Kim, she was in my head. She pushed me, manipulated me. I didn't mean those words in the sacristy. I didn't mean. Stop. My voice cut through his excuses. I heard you. You meant them. Maybe not rehearsed, maybe not planned, but true. Words don't fall out of nowhere, Jake. They come from inside. He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. I ruined everything, he whispered. I ruined us. I watched him, my own son, crumbling in front of me. Love twisted inside me, not gone, never gone, but reshaped, scarred. I could not deny the bond of blood, but I could no longer confuse it with obligation. I forgive you, I said at last. His head snapped up, hope flashing. I held his gaze. But forgiveness doesn't rebuild the old house. That house is gone, burned down, and I will not live in the ashes. He swallowed hard. So that's it? You'll never help me again? I'll never rescue you again, I corrected. The door is open for an adult who takes responsibility, not for a child who demands. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't know how to start without you. You should have thought of that, I said, softer now. When you laughed at me in front of your friends. When you plotted your escape with another woman in a church. When you let your bride speak of me like I was a piece of furniture to be moved into storage. You knew what you were doing, Jake. You just never thought the bank would close. His body shook with sobs. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the boy who once clung to me after nightmares. For a moment I felt the old urge to reach out to soothe. But I kept my hands folded. Love does not mean indulgence. Forgiveness does not mean access. He wept. I let him. When his tears subsided, silence filled the room. You'll always be my son, I said quietly. That bond remains. But the umbilical cord of dependence, that is cut. You must live now as a man, not as a child tethered to my sacrifice. He nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb a language he had never learned. He stood unsteady. I'll try, he whispered. That, I said, is all you can do. He walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned once more, eyes red, voice low. Do you still love me? I took a breath. Yes, but love doesn't mean financing your life. Remember that. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. In the silence that followed, I heard the house breathe. The walls seemed lighter, as though even they were relieved. I sat back in my chair, exhaustion washing over me. My chest ached not from regret but from release. The bond of mother and son remained. But the leash I had mistaken for love was gone. And in that quiet I realized something. My house had room again. Not for demands, not for manipulation, but for air. For me. Spring arrived in Seattle like a cautious guest, tiptoeing past gray skies before daring to scatter blossoms across the waterfront. The cherry trees unfolded in pink clouds, their petals drifting onto wet sidewalks, carpeting the city in a beauty so fragile it almost demanded silence. I walked among them, my hands free of bags, my phone silent in my pocket. Once, these walks had been rushed, detours between errands, bank transfers for Jake, grocery runs to stock his empty fridge, pharmacy visits to pick up prescriptions Kim never thanked me for. Now each step belonged solely to me. My studio, too, had bloomed. Clay lined the shelves, bowls leaning slightly to one side, vases tall and thin as questions, plates glazed in imperfect blues. They were not flawless, but they were mine. When the local gallery invited me to display them, I laughed at first, certain it was pity. But then I saw my name on the printed program. Ella Carter, Forms of Resilience. Opening night, the room smelled of wine and sawdust. Guests wandered between displays, murmuring, tilting their heads. My piece Woman in Wind stood at the center. A tall vase, its surface cracked and repaired with veins of gold, inspired by Sam's lesson in kintsugi. The curator whispered that buyers were already interested, but I shook my head. That vase would not be sold. It was not merchandise. It was my contract with myself. Proof that cracks do not end stories, they reveal them. Jake wrote rarely now. A text every few weeks, neutral and short. I'm working. I'm fine. I replied with equal brevity. No warmth, no cruelty, just even lines. Kim was gone entirely. Her absence a silence that felt less like loss and more like relief. The family group chat lay dormant, its last message still my words. The bank is closed. The money I once hoarded for them now flowed into the Step Forward Fund. Applications arrived daily. Single mothers with sketches of bakeries, fathers with dreams of repair shops, young widows with nothing but an idea and desperation. I read each one carefully, my heart tightening at the familiar language of survival. We awarded the first grants in May. A woman named Teresa wept as she described the cafe she would finally open. A man named Raul promised to hire 2 other single fathers once his car repair business expanded. Their gratitude was not for me as a benefactor but for the chance itself. That distinction mattered. Every dollar I gave now created motion, not dependence. For the first time in decades, money was not a leash. It was a tool. Evenings found me at the waterfront with Sam. Sometimes we walked in silence, watching ferries drift across the bay. Sometimes he spoke of bridges he had designed, the math of steel and gravity. Every structure, he said once, depends on tension. Too much it collapses. Too little it crumbles. Balance is strength. I thought of my life, of how long I had endured imbalance, how much weight I had carried alone, how close I had come to collapse. Balance had been stolen from me. Now finally I was building it myself. At home the quiet no longer frightened me. It breathed with me. I lit candles, not for anyone else's celebration but for my own peace. I cooked small meals. Lentil soup, roasted vegetables, fresh bread from a recipe my mother had taught me. I ate slowly, savoring, without the shadow of resentment for mouths that devoured without thanks. Sometimes guilt still flickered. A mother's instinct dies hard. I would catch myself wondering if Jake had eaten, if he paid his rent, if loneliness had gnawed at him. But then I remembered his laughter at my expense, Kim's voice declaring my exile, the way they had expected my silence as naturally as air. Love remained, yes, but guilt no longer commanded me. Late bloom, I realized, is not lesser bloom. The petals that unfold after storms are tougher, their colors deeper for having waited. One night after the exhibition, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine. The city below pulsed with lights, indifferent and alive. I thought of all that had been lost, the years of sacrifice unnoticed, the illusions shattered, the sun I could no longer rescue. Pain pressed at me, but it no longer owned me. I whispered aloud to the dark. Never confuse love with financing. Never confuse silence with peace. Never confuse family with entitlement. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into me like anchors. I looked at Woman and Wind in the corner of my living room. Its golden seams gleaming faintly. My life was cracked, yes, but it was whole. Stronger at the breaks. And I thought, late bloom is still bloom. Its shade may be darker, its petals fewer, but its roots are deep. That night, I slept without fear of the phone buzzing with demands. Without the dread of being told I was nothing. Without rehearsing apologies for sins I never committed. The ending wasn't soft. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was scarred, uneven, imperfect. But it was mine. And sometimes that is enough.